I want to, first of all, thank everyone for joining us tonight. This is the fifth and final one of these Democracy Docket pre-election events. And I want to thank all of you who have been at the previous ones. I've been looking forward to this one, which is why we saved this for last. And I want to make sure that everyone takes a moment to ensure that they are subscribed to Democracy Docket. And if you are not already a member of Democracy Docket, the team is offering a discount between now and Election Day. It's $20 off the premium membership, which gets you access to all of the content, including the litigation look ahead, State of Democracy, the weekly news you missed, my Tuesday tip sheet, and everything else. And it also gets you invited to all of the premium events that we do. So there'll be a link to become a member, or you can go to the website and you can click on the membership tab, and you'll be able to do that. But let me, without further ado, now that we are at 3,000 attendees, let me introduce our panel, and then I'm going to turn this over to Brian Tyler Cohen. I am joined by two of the best people in politics, and I mean that in both the sense of they are two of the most important people, two of the most knowledgeable people, but they are also just two of the best people. They are two of the real good guys fighting for democracy every day. Jamie Raskin is really needs no introduction. He is a member of Congress and also a constitutional law professor. So you get both an expert analysis on what the hell is going on in Congress, but you also get an expert in the U.S. Constitution. Since being sworn in 2017, he is become the leading defender of democracy and voting rights in Congress. If there is something happening that is pro-democracy in the halls of Congress, Jamie Raskin is leading it. He was also the lead impeachment manager for Donald Trump's second impeachment and served on the House Select Committee on the January 6th attack. Brian Tyler Cohen, who is going to be our moderator and host for this evening. Brian is a good friend. He is a progressive journalist and content creator with more than 7 million subscribers across all social media platforms. I have realized that he is also like just one of the greatest people. And if there was a definition for mensch, it would be Brian. In the Yiddish dictionary, it's either he's either a mensch or he's a mocker, depending on the circumstances. But we'll go with mensch for tonight. Through his popular YouTube channel, he brings the biggest issues, including voting rights and democracy, to the forefront and reaches millions and millions of people online. He hosts a voting rights series with me called Democracy Watch. And I hope everyone goes to his YouTube channel right now and make sure they are subscribed to the YouTube channel, and make sure you watch Democracy Watch. Also watch the other series that he does. He does a great one with Glenn Kirshner and one with Tim as well, about everything about politics. But you also need to watch the series that he does with Jamie Raskin called Class, where the congressman he debunk constitutional fallacies and right-wing fever dreams. And I want to end by saying, in a time in which the mainstream media finds an endless ways to disappoint, and every day there's like a new way that they find to disappoint. The one place you can always go for accurate information and analysis that is unbought and unbossed, it is with Brian Tyler Cohen. He tells it like it is, and there is no corporate overlord behind him. So please make sure you're subscribed to his YouTube channels, and you support everything he does. I also don't want to miss out on telling you he is also a New York Times bestseller. And if you have not read his book, shameless, go buy his book. It is one of the best reads of the year. It's really, I cannot recommend it more wholeheartedly. So without more further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Brian to lead us through.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you for the kind words. It is an absolute honor to be here with both of you. You could not find bigger heroes for democracy than the two of you. So we'll have more to say on that, but thank you so much on behalf of everybody who's watching right now and who's going to watch this when it's put online later. Thank you for the work that you both are doing. Okay, so let's get right into this, because I know that there are a lot of issues that we're contending with right now as it relates to threats to democracy around the certification of this election. But most immediately, I want to talk about what Donald Trump previewed when he was on stage at Madison Square Garden, and that was this idea that he has a little secret that he'll only unveil after the election. Of course, the obvious suggestion here is that he's going to engage in some scheme along with Mike Johnson to refuse to certify the electors in hopes that it will be kicked into a contingent election where House delegations will decide. But I want to ask right off the bat, can Donald Trump succeed at this effort not to certify the election? And if the answer is no, can you walk us through the process for how it won't succeed?
Sure. I'll jump in first with the process, and then I will let the congressman weigh in, both because he's a better constitutional lawyer than I am, and he spends an unfortunate amount of time with the speaker, and I am unburdened by that. First, for people who didn't see it, he suggested, sort of nodding and pointing at Speaker Johnson, that they had some secret. I think that Donald Trump is, not at the mental acuity to probably have a secret. And if he does have a secret, it's probably a dumb secret. So I don't want people to be overly worried. I do think that Donald Trump is more desperate than he was in 2020, and he was pretty desperate in 2020. Remember, he has been convicted, not just charged, but convicted of at least one set of crimes in New York for which he is awaiting sentencing, which could lead to a term of imprisonment. He faces other indictments, and he views the path to his personal liberty as running through, of all things, winning the presidency of the United States. The fact that the Republican Party seems to be going along with that, or not seems to be, but has embraced it, speaks volumes about the moral bankruptcy of the Republican Party. But I think that Trump looks out at the landscape right now. He's being told by his pollsters and by other people around his campaign that he may very well lose this election, and he is prepared to do whatever it takes to stay in power. And if that means subverting the outcome, he will do that. Now, that is baked in the cake, right? The Republican Party has built a voter suppression war machine. They have prepared to try to undermine certification at the county level and the state level. We've seen that. There's been litigation. They've been losing these cases. And I think that in the post-election, we can assume that if that's what it comes to, that's what they'll try to do again, as they tried in 2020 and failed, and tried in 2022 and failed, and they'll try in 2024 and fail. The first step will be to try to prevent counties from certifying election results, then trying to prevent states from certifying election results. The good news I have for folks is that the courts have been pretty uniform, or not pretty, they have been completely uniform in rejecting these efforts. And I have every expectation that lawyers like me and others will go to court and continue to beat back these efforts to subvert the election results. So what do they do next? Well, then they try to get, in more desperate efforts, they try to get the courts to throw out votes. And this is where Mike Johnson comes in, and where I want to sort of hand this over to the congressman, because in 2020, the federal elected official most responsible for January 6th, other than Donald Trump, was Mike Johnson. Now, that's not me saying sour grapes now that he's been elected speaker. I said this about Mike Johnson before I knew who the hell Mike Johnson was, when he was just an obscure congressman from Louisiana, because he led the effort to get House Republicans at a time where there was disorganization in their conference. He led the effort to organize them in December of 2020 to all sign onto a brief in the U.S. Supreme Court to throw out the election results in 4 states. Okay, so this Louisiana congressman says basically he's coordinating with the Trump campaign and Donald Trump, and he wants House Republicans to unite behind this idea, first to go to court and throw out the election results. When that fails, and it does fail, he then is instrumental in rallying them behind trying to prevent certification in the halls of Congress on the night of January 6th. Now that fails. So is it any surprise that Donald Trump thinks he has a secret? It is not really a secret, right? It's like the game plan they tried in 2020, and he wants to try it again. There are lots of reasons why that's not going to succeed, none the least of which that the Electoral Count Reform Act has made it harder for that. Congress has since passed a new law that makes it harder for that to achieve. It's also not going to be able to achieve because Hakeem Jeffries is going to be the speaker on January 6th. Well, on January 3rd, the U.S. House of Representatives and the U.S. Senate will reorganize, and the new members of the Congress will vote and elect a new speaker. And I have every expectation that in addition to Chuck Schumer being back as the majority leader in the U.S. Senate, Hakeem Jeffries will be leading the House Democrats and the House as Speaker. And therefore, people have nothing to worry about. So with that, Congressman, you can offer a more expert inside analysis and probably a more expert constitutional analysis.
Mark, it's a great pleasure to be with you and my friend Brian Tyler Cohen on the eve of this most momentous of all elections. And thanks to all of our thousands of friends from across the country for tuning in here. Look, I was hoping that the big secret was going to be that Donald Trump's ridiculous foray into politics will be announced as a big fraud, a big con, and he was just kidding, and he's going to get out of politics and let us resume American history without him. But I'm afraid, no, it's far more likely that the little secret they've got is the same secret he was dropping breadcrumbs about back in 2020. Remember when he said to Jeffrey Clark, his erstwhile attorney general, who I think still claims he was attorney general for a while, that, just I want you to get in there to declare that the election was a fraud or election was corrupt, and then leave it to me and my friends in the House, by which he meant at that point Jim Jordan. It looks like his little friend in the House now is Mike Johnson. But the idea is to somehow claim that there's something wrong with the election, there's no majority in the Electoral College, and then, according to the terms of the 12th Amendment, the House of Representatives must immediately resolve into a contingent election. And now, why did they want a contingent election in 2020 when Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats were in charge? Well, they understood that in a contingent election under the 12th Amendment, we don't vote according to one member, one vote, the way we usually vote in the House. We vote in a contingent election according to one state, one vote. And there, the Republicans knew that they had 27 states where they had a majority. The Democrats had 22, and there was one state, Pennsylvania, which was split down the middle 9-9. So their votes would have been essentially nullified immediately, even had Liz Cheney, as the sole at-large representative from Wyoming, gone with the Democrats to stand up for the actual winner in the race, which was Joe Biden, who had won by more than 7 million votes in the popular vote, 306 to 232 in the Electoral College. They still would have had that 26 vote majority. Now, we don't know, since it's the new House of Representatives that would be voting, exactly where they will be, but I'm with Marc Elias that in the actual House, we're going to have a majority. The Democrats are going to have a majority. Hakeem Jeffries will be in, but it's quite possible that the Republicans would still have a majority in the state delegations, where they indeed have a lead now, just because of the distribution of the population. And of course, the smaller, more rural populous states have been trending Republican, of course. So I think that the big trick that he's alluding to is the trick of somehow trying to force it into a contingent election. Now, Mark mentioned that the new House of Representatives is seated on January 3rd. We get sworn in 3 days before January 6th. And so there is speculation that the Republicans might try to pull a rabbit out of a hat or throw a monkey wrench into the proceedings on January 3rd to actually deny seats to members of the House who actually have won election and who've been certified by their state's election authorities. This has not been done before. The House has traditionally just accepted the certification of the victors in House elections that have been sent in by the states. But we know that, Trump's party no longer operates like a democracy party. It operates like an authoritarian cult of personality where anything goes. And we know one of the hallmark characteristics of an authoritarian or a fascist political party is they don't accept the outcome of democratic elections that don't go their way. And as we've seen, they're perfectly willing to condone or to refuse to disavow political violence as an instrument for obtaining power. So we just have to make sure that we are protecting not just the presidential election, and thank God we've got the best lawyers in the country with Marc Elias working on that, but we also have to make sure that we are defending the election of the U.S. House as well against any corruption or shenanigans that the MAGA party will try to throw at us, because the two are intertwined constitutionally if you check out the terms of the 12th Amendment.
Okay, so let's take this question now. With regard to the Electoral Count Reform Act, the newly reformed Electoral Count Act from prior, what thresholds have to be met in order to have this this decision get thrown into a contingent election?
Okay, so a contingent election is triggered if there is not a majority in the Electoral College. So traditionally, that's been if there have been multiple candidates. And that's when it's really happened in American history. But one of the fraudulent pretenses I think they were trying to cook up in 2020 was this phony return of the certificates of ascertainment to the states on the theory that there were still people in the state legislatures complaining, or there were these counterfeit rival electoral college slates. And there they would have declared that there was no majority in the electoral college. I mean, it raises complex questions about whether then those electoral votes were actually cast or not. But in any event, all of that was an attempt to lead up to kicking the election into into the House for the contingent election. So the rules have been changed in a number of ways. One of them is we've simply clarified that the vice president doesn't have the unilateral authority to somehow nullify electoral college votes or return electoral college votes. Nobody ever thought that seriously. And of course, Mike Pence refused to go along with that phony claim. We've made it more difficult to file an objection. Before, in the old days, it was one member of the House, one member of the Senate, and then that would trigger the vote, and the House and the Senate have to resolve into separate proceedings in order to consider an objection at that point and vote on it. So that process has been made more difficult with with the increase of the percentage of members who have to vote on that. Still, of course, the MAGA party operates as a bloc, and presumably they could overcome the new percentages. But the real thing is that as long as the certificates of ascertainment are not messed with and they come in okay, and as long as we're able to seat the members of the House and the Senate, then I think we will be able to defend against any form of mischief that arises. We certainly are going to be much safer against the violence. We're not going to have Donald Trump in the office inciting insurrectionary violence and then sitting on his hands or munching hamburgers and French fries, watching the proceedings on TV as Congress gets overrun by Proud Boys and Oath Keepers and other violence seekers. We have Joe Biden there, so he would obviously call the National Guard in a situation like that. But we're going to have this has already been declared to be a national security event, so we're going to have much better security to begin with. We're going to have non-scalable fencing and so on. So I think that we're going to do much better in terms of protecting the proceedings on January 6th. I hope that January 3rd will go the same way. We're counting on Marc Elias and the great teams of lawyers we have around the country to prevent the certification process from being defeated and thwarted in different ways earlier on. I don't think, or we're going to be in a much better position to stop them on January 6th, if that's their plan. I'm much more worried about what they're going to do to try to throw monkey wrenches in earlier in the process at the precinct level, at the county level, and at the state level.
And that was my
Yeah,
exact
let me just add,
question.
let me just add real briefly. Look, I think that the Electoral Count Reform Act does a few things that I think are very helpful. Number one, it makes clear state legislatures can't change the method of allocating their electors after the election takes place, which means that the whole nonsense that the state legislatures are going to, after the election's over, replace the outcome with their own outcome, that's now off the table. The other thing is that even in 2020, with a few, with some governors that were, more friendly to Donald Trump, there was no Republican governor who refused to sign a certificate of ascertainment. And there really aren't, with the exception of Brian Kemp in Georgia, there aren't really Republican governors in any state, any swing state. And so I think the chances that a state does not send a certificate of ascertainment reflecting the winner, I think are dramatically less than even in 2020. And assuming that's the case, there is, I think, a lot less mischief that the House can make. I do, or the Congress as a whole can make. I do agree that, where we need to be, where I think people need to be focused is first and foremost in making sure that they vote, right? Because ultimately at the end of the day, the numbers are going to be the numbers. And so if people make a plan to vote and they show up and vote, that is going to be the single most important thing. The second is to make sure in the days after the election, when Donald Trump is falsely claiming victory and saying that he won when he hasn't. I mean, Donald Trump lies about everything, so I'll lie about this. When he says he's won, people just need to tune out the nonsense, because it is just nonsense. And there may be a period in which there is uncertainty, but honestly, there's been periods of uncertainty after the elections for many years. It's just people get more anxious about them now. There will be lawyers making sure that every vote counts and the like. But I have a lot of confidence that we have learned a lot from 2020. Let's not forget that Donald Trump tried to subvert the election results in a lot of different ways in 2020, and he failed. And we've learned a lot from that. And so I think if people vote, they should have confidence that the process will almost certainly sort itself out okay.
Our next question is there any way that Joe Biden could avail himself of any presidential powers newly imbued by the Supreme Court? So if he needs to, at any point, is there anything that we should or could expect Joe Biden to do now that the Supreme Court has basically said that anything is permissible by a president so long as it falls under the official acts umbrella?
So look, this is the thing that I both love about being a Democrat, and we all need to recognize, which is that Democrats are not a lawless party. Like we don't elect people for president on a platform that because they have immunity, they will commit what would otherwise be criminal acts. Yeah. Joe Biden is a good and decent man. Joe Biden is not going to do the things that Donald Trump would do. So there is an asymmetry to this. And rather than lamenting the asymmetry on the part of Democrats, I think we need to recognize the absolute abnormality of the circumstance we're in that this asymmetry exists entirely on the Republican side. It was not that long ago where it would have been unthinkable for any president to avail themselves of the need for immunity to commit crimes, right? It would have been unthinkable to think that a president would incite an insurrection in the nation's capital. And, I'm struck, Congressman, by, the changes made in the Electoral Count Reform Act. The theory of the objections was that members of the House and Senate were serious people, and they were not going to interpose objections. Even a small number of them would not interpose objections to the outcome of an election simply to curry favor with a candidate of their own party. And so, do I think that Joe Biden is going to turn into a criminal because he can, because of this report? No, and he shouldn't, right? That's just not the way democracy can function. I have a lot less confidence that Republicans will abide by their oaths of office and do the same thing, which is, of course, the reason why we're in this predicament with Donald Trump to begin with. But Congressman, you tell me.
Well, no, I think you've said it perfectly, Mark. Different people have suggested that, which is a sign of people's extreme anxiety about what Donald Trump will do, knowing that he is an utterly authoritarian and fascist to the core personality, as his former chief of staff said, and as Mark Milley, the head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, said about the guy. But that's not who we are. And we are playing every kind of political hardball we must. We are mobilizing the greatest lawyers in the country to defeat all of their nonsense at every level. But we're not going to break the law. And I know that President Biden will not take advantage of the outrageous invitation offered by the mega Supreme Court to engage in actions that would be felony crimes on the theory that he won't be prosecuted for it later, because that's not who we are. And we're going to win by taking the high road and by getting everybody out to vote. And I've been to 27 states here, and the Democrats are fired up everywhere. We have a real ground game going on in every state I've been to, with the canvas kickoffs and the rallies and the online action. And remember, the Republicans only really assemble if Donald Trump is there. That's how a cult works. It's not like they come out for other people. It's not happening except when Trump is there. And of course, J.D. Vance is so unpopular, it's counterproductive for them to put him out there. And J.D. Vance, everybody says he's got no convictions, but that's okay, because Donald Trump's got 36 of them and he can share with J.D. Vance. So look, we're going to win it on the high road. We're going to win it fair and square. And we are going to defend the Electoral College, including me, even though I'm an opponent of the Electoral College. I think we need to move to a national popular vote. We've had 5 popular vote losers in our history, twice in this century. And
both Republicans.
Both right-wing Republicans. The Electoral College is an accident waiting to happen. As we saw on January 6th, 2021, it can get you killed these days because there are so many booby traps and off-ramps and moments where a strategic bad faith actor like Donald Trump can exploit in order to try to reopen and revisit what is a clear result. And we had a clear result in 2020 with Biden winning by more than 7 million votes, 306 to 232 in the Electoral College, a margin that Trump had beaten Hillary by, and he declared that to be an absolute landslide. And yet, despite the rulings of 60 federal and state courts, including by 8 judges he named to the bench, they continued to propound and continue to propound the absolute myth and fiction and lie that he won the election. And that's why we're in a scary situation. But we're going to get through it by defending the rule of law, defending the Constitution, and defending the right of the people to choose the president through the Electoral College system. And Brian, the Senate didn't do their job because Mitch McConnell chickened out. And even though he said that the House managers had made our case and that Donald Trump was actually and ethically responsible for everything that happened, he said that the Senate lacked jurisdiction to try him and convict him, which was a legal question we had decided on the first day of the trial, which means he basically engaged with 20 other Republican senators who said the same thing in an act of jury nullification, the greatest case of jury nullification in American history. So the Senate didn't do their job. The Republican Party as a political party did not do their job. The Supreme Court, which is now in Donald Trump's right back pocket, did not do their job. It's up to the people, and the people backed up by the great lawyers we've got. We got to win the election, and we got to defend the election at every step along the way. And the Democratic members of the House and the Senate are going to be standing up for a free and fair and honest election in the constitutional system.
Now, I just want to send a quick note to folks who are adding questions to the Q&A. Thank you. And one of those questions that we got right now, which is on a theme that I'm seeing over and over, is there a way in which this could end up ultimately in front of the Supreme Court? The decision about the election here between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump?
Look, it's always possible. And I understand why there is grave concern about that, and with good reason. But I think we need to keep in mind a few things. The first is that though the Supreme Court in 2000 did decide the outcome of the election effectively, that was a very, very close race in a single state. You know, the state of Florida was divided by 500 and some odd votes, and there was a question about how the recount would proceed or not proceed, and the Supreme Court got involved. And on a very unfortunate split based on partisan ideology, they effectively halted the recount and gave the results to George W. Bush, who had lost the popular vote nationwide. Okay, so that is a data point. But the fact is that is the only time that the Supreme Court has really played that role. In 2020, it had opportunities to get involved, and it chose not to. Now, does that mean that they would not do so in 2024? Not necessarily, but I don't think the court is itching to be involved in these cases. And I think that for it to play a outcome determinative role, you would again need a single state that was where their decision on a question of law or a question of fact would be outcome determinative. And very, very few presidential elections, honestly, are that close. I mean, one of the legacies of 2020 that I lament is that Donald Trump has succeeded in convincing people, even people who think that Joe Biden won. They have convinced people that the election was really, really close. And the truth is, it wasn't really, really close. I mean, for Donald Trump to have won the election, he would have needed multiple states' results to have flipped. And those results themselves were not measured in the hundreds. They were not measured in the single thousands. They were measured in the tens of thousands or more than the tens of thousands. And that is just, you know, was an impossible task given where we were in 2020. And so worry about the Supreme Court, yes. Obsess about the Supreme Court, no. There are plenty of lawyers like myself who both worry and obsess about everything that is happening in the Supreme Court. I can tell you right now, there are two cases that the Republicans have sought emergency stays in the Supreme Court, one out of Virginia, one out of Pennsylvania. I promise you, I am following them. I promise you, Democracy Docket is following them. If you subscribe to Democracy Docket, you'll get alerts even when we get decisions there that are of consequence. But, and Brian, you and I will do videos about those outcomes, right? Like, there are people who are going to follow what's happening in the Supreme Court, but the much more likely outcome of the election is going to be decided, first and foremost, by how voters vote, because how voters vote is ultimately, you know, the facts on the ground. And then the second is, to the extent there are ambiguities in the law and these things, it's much more likely to be the decisions of hundreds or dozens of local judges, you know, state judges, district court, federal judges, who are dealing with the regular, you know, flow of issues that come up around election, whether this group of ballots counts or that group of ballots doesn't count, or what do you do with an unforeseen circumstance. So I don't want people to not worry about the courts, because I, you know, make a living out of worrying about the courts, but I don't want people to obsess overly about just the U.S. Supreme Court.
Another topic that we're getting a lot of questions about is the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact, this idea of how can we get away from the Electoral College. So can you speak about, and I think Congressman Raskin, this might be a good one for you to dive into here. Can you speak about what the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact is and how close we are to the prospect of it actually replacing the Electoral College as it's used right now, actually how close we are to that coming to fruition?
Yes, indeed. This was the very first bill I introduced as a member of the Maryland State Senate. It was my very first bill in politics to create the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact. Now, the cleanest way, of course, to get rid of the Electoral College and to move to a national popular vote is by amending the Constitution. But that's a tall order requiring a 2/3 vote in the House, a 2/3 vote in the Senate, and then 3/4 of the states. The way we've gotten to most constitutional changes is through bottom-up grassroots action in the states. Like the 19th Amendment women's suffrage was preceded by decades of agitation in the states to get state legislatures to change their laws or to change their state constitutions. The 17th Amendment, which shifted the mode of election of the U.S. senators from the legislatures to the people, also was preceded by many states, a majority of the states, saying we will be bound by a popular vote for whoever the people want to elect for U.S. Senate. So this picks up on that theme. The National Popular Vote Interstate Compact says we're creating a coalition of states who will agree to cast their electors according to whoever wins the national popular vote rather than the vote in our states. But it only becomes effective when we have enough electors in the coalition so that it will be effective every time. And so when we get 270 electors in the compact, it will be activated. And then that will begin a process where the state legislatures cast their electors for the winner in the national popular vote rather than in their state. And that will be a bridge then to Congress finally catching up with the people, catching up with the states, and passing the required constitutional amendment to abolish the Electoral College once and for all. Commanding majorities of the American people, 75, 80% of the people want to move to a national popular vote. A lot of people think we have it. A lot of people don't understand the Electoral College system. But one thing everybody can understand right now is that we have an election system for president that has reduced the national election process and the national campaign to 7 or 8 votes, where everybody is going, where everybody is calling. That's how that works. If we elected the president the way we elect governors and representatives and senators and mayors, every vote in America would count, and every vote would count equally, and everybody could campaign in their own communities to turn out the vote, and we would have much higher turnout across the country. Right now, turnout is 8 or 10 points higher in the swing states than it is in the non-swing states where there's no election basically happening. So we've got a system that has given us popular vote losers multiple times. It reduces the election to a handful of states. It depresses turnout. It's extremely complicated. And then it's got all these booby traps that can be triggered by the MAGA party or somebody else who wants to try to keep revisiting the result instead of allowing the people to decide. So that's a conversation we have to have seriously, and I hope we will have it seriously after this election, after we win through the Electoral College system as it's being practiced today, and we defend that electoral result.
And I should
if I can add one point, sort of as a political scientist or pretend political scientist, it has had another impact in the modern era that I think is extremely bad for the country and extremely bad for democracy, which is it has allowed and in fact incentivized the Republican Party to become an anti-majoritarian party. So, you basically have 3 federal branches of government, or not 3 branches of government. You have 3 bodies that are elected at the federal level. You have the president, the House, and the Senate. The Senate is by its very structure anti-majoritarian. It just is. Every state gets 2 senators, whether you're North Dakota or you're California, right? So that is an anti-majoritarian body. The House teeters on being anti-majoritarian because of gerrymandering. So every time the Republicans gerrymander, what they are really doing is insulating themselves from popular will, right? They are able to control a disproportionate number of seats of power with a minority of the population. So it disincentivizes them competing for a majority of the vote and incentivizes them competing for a minority of the vote. And then you have the presidency, which historically had a strong majoritarian pull, both because there wasn't often deviation between the popular vote and the Electoral College, but also because I think presidents saw their power. There was a famous book by Professor Neustadt that called Presidential Power. I think it was titled, and the thesis of it was that the power of the presidency is the power to persuade. And so the idea was that presidents have power because they have popular mandates. And so if you look through old presidential speeches, they are always hearkening back to their mandates as popularly elected figures by the total government. Well, the recent Republican Party, they have given up on popular mandates. Like, they now Donald Trump celebrates the cleverness of being able to win a minority of the vote, but still govern with majority power. So there is a problem with the Electoral College in that it has deprived the American people of a leader that seeks to govern through popular mandates. And I think we have seen the worst instincts of that with a Donald Trump, a Mike Johnson, a Mitch McConnell, where they have elevated to an art form. You know, what was it called? The Hastert rule in the House, you know, McConnell's way of working in the Senate, and of course, Donald Trump wanting to govern through, through a minority of the votes cast.
I should also note.
If I could just add a postscript to that, Brian.
Sure.
Some people have been asking, where are we in the national popular vote?
That's what I was
It's
just gonna
actually
say.
we're most of the way there. We need 270 electoral college votes in the coalition to activate it. I think we're around 175 or 180 now.
We are at 209 enacted so far.
209. Okay. They were further along than I thought. There's 17 states in the District of Columbia. Unfortunately, it's become a partisan thing, which it shouldn't be. In fact, Donald Trump himself was a huge critic of the Electoral College and said it made America the laughingstock of the world in the 2012 election, when he thought that Mitt Romney was going to win in the popular vote and lose in the Electoral College vote. He was just railing about it. After the 2016 election, he seems to have discovered some secret virtues to the Electoral College system as it's practiced today. But we are, if we could get over that partisan problem, and a lot of Republicans were for it when I first introduced it in Maryland. A lot of my colleagues were. I think a number of state legislative chambers controlled by Republicans have passed it, including the Michigan House passed it. So look, I remember when we were voting on it, one of my colleagues took me in the back room and he said, look, just tell me, between you and me, like, who does this really help, the Democrats or Republicans? And I said, all right, I'll tell you a secret. It helps whichever party gets a majority of the votes. That's all it is. Popular majority rules, as opposed to all of the manipulation and machinations that you see now under the Electoral College system. And we saw that what happened in 2000 would not have been possible. All of the strategic mischief and manipulation that took place with the Secretary of State, Katherine Harris, who doubled as the chair of the Bush campaign. None of that could have happened if it were not an Electoral College system, right? They won by just over 500 votes in Florida. They were able to pull a number of switcheroos, and then finally the Supreme Court intervened to stop the counting of ballots manually in Florida. And then by winning all of the electors, the 25 electors from Florida, they were able to clinch the election, despite the fact that Gore had won a majority in the national popular vote. So look, what we're suffering from today is not democracy, it's the impediments to democracy, the obstacles to democracy, whether we're talking about gerrymandering, which is not constitutional, that's made up, or the Electoral College, which is in the Constitution, or the filibuster, which is not constitutional, that's made up. But we need to get democracy moving again. You know, we say that this election is about defending democracy. That's a little bit deceptive. Yes, it's about defending the institutions and practices of democracy, but democracy is always an unfinished product. It's always moving. It's a project. And so we need to pass statehood for the people of Puerto Rico, so they're not kicked around by the MAGA party and denied hundreds of millions of dollars in hurricane relief they should have gotten back in Hurricane Maria. We need to pass statehood for people in Washington, D.C., the only residents of a national capital on planet Earth who are not represented in their own national legislature. If you told the people of Paris that they couldn't be represented in l'Assemblée Nationale because they breathe the same air as other people's representatives, you'd have another French Revolution on your hands. And in fact, in the 117th Congress, when I was the floor leader for DC statehood, I started by thanking the people of DC who have a genuine, bona fide political grievance, and yet didn't come down in the Capitol and beat the hell out of our police officers and knock them over the head and get people killed and drive the members of the House and the Senate out of the chambers. They've done it the right way in DC. They petitioned for statehood. We've got to get democracy moving again. We need to admit new states in the union. We need to fight for national popular vote. We need the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. We got to get rid of gerrymandering. So when we're talking about defending democracy, we're also talking about promoting democracy and making the country a more perfect union.
And I would just note, to add to that, we do have 209 electoral votes signed on. There are 50 pending right now, and that is in Virginia, North Carolina, Michigan, and Nevada. So that would take us to 259. And then folks in states that aren't yet signed on, Pennsylvania is a good option. Arizona is a good option. So if we're able to flip state legislatures, then this can be something that they can take up, and we can get one step closer to a true representative democracy here. As we continue to wind down here, I do want to do something of a quick lightning round. So I'm going to ask both Mark and the Congressman a quick question. And the first one is for the Congressman. If you can enact one voting or election policy with the snap of a finger, one policy, what would it be?
Well, they would have to be a comprehensive bill, including everything we just talked about. But
one small policy that is an omnibus bill.
well, the Senate has become such an obstacle to everything we want to do, whether we're talking about, restoring Roe versus Wade and Women's Health Protection Act or voting rights itself and so on, that if we could add new states to represent the millions of disenfranchised people in the country, we would begin to change the dynamics. The national popular vote is like that. So yeah, I'm for the omnibus democracy reform bill that we're gonna push forward so we can keep democracy moving in America. I'm afraid I've got to sign off, gentlemen. It's great being with you as always, Brian, and thank you to the great Marc Elias. I hope you don't sleep for the next, let's call it 3 weeks, just to get us through this. All right.
Congressman, thank you so much. And Mark,
Thanks, everybody.
I'll throw it over to you now for this lightning round question. That is, if you could change one thing about our court system, federal or state, with a snap of a finger, what would that be?
Yeah, I would expand the size of the Supreme Court, and I'd expand the number of judges on the courts of appeals. So in other words, I'm not in favor of just expanding this U.S. Supreme Court for the sake of expanding the Supreme Court. I'm in favor of expanding all of our federal court systems. The fact is, cases move too slowly through the district courts because we don't have enough district court judges. They languish in courts of appeals because we don't have enough court of appeals judges. And the U.S. Supreme Court has become a tangled mess. In addition to the various ethics problems that they have, the problems with the serious problems, the way in which Mitch McConnell gamed the nominations for the last two justices. But in addition to that, what many people don't realize is that the U.S. Supreme Court only hears between 70 and 80 cases a year. Now, this is frankly crazy in a country of our size. I mean, there are millions of cases that go through the federal courts every year. There are hundreds of thousands of cases that are petitioned for the U.S. Supreme Court to hear. And they're only hearing 70 of them a year. And so, we couldn't solve several problems with our court system by simply expanding the federal courts, not allowing the single judges that we now see shopped in random places in Texas, to issue nationwide injunctions. A lot of these problems could be solved by simply expanding the courts.
Okay, well, we will leave it there.
All right, but I have my question for you, Brian.
Okay, let's hear it.
All right, so you hear, I'm now going to seize back the microphone. You probably more than anyone I know hear from a cross-section of people. You interview presidents. You sat with Joe Biden and interviewed him. You've interviewed the Speaker of the House, or former Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi. You did a book tour where you got to sign books and meet ordinary Americans who are coming up to you every day, with questions. You are not only beloved by millions of people on social media, but you're one of the few people on social media who you actually engage intelligently with. You're the audience. The audience trusts you and they ask you questions and you engage in it. And so as we sit here now, 8 days from the election, the question that I know you must get is a combination of fear, a combination of hope, a combination of anxiety. People want to know what they should do, what they should say, what they should feel. What is your advice to all of these people who are just every day watching you and thinking and hanging on your words? But what is your advice to them? How to get through the next few days and what they should be doing?
My advice is twofold here. So the first is the polls are going to be close. What we can take from the polls is not to look at them and go on this polar coaster of emotions based on whether we see Donald Trump gain a half a point here or Kamala Harris gain a half a point here. The polls are close. We know it's going to be a tight race. We know it's a margin of error race. It has been a margin of error race in the past. Remember, we won in 2020 in Georgia by 0.2 of a point. We won in Wisconsin in 2020 by 0.7 of a point. We won in Pennsylvania in 2020 by 1 point. We won in Michigan by just over 2 points. If you looked at a poll right now and saw that Kamala Harris was up 0.2 of a point somewhere, you'd probably have a pit in your stomach. But what I'm trying to say is that we have had those numbers before and we have won with those numbers before. So do not let the polls signify to you that you should fall into a pit of despair, because that's not what previous results have shown. And we can have, even if the polls are bang on correct and Kamala Harris is up 0.2 of a point and you are in the throes of anxiety as the result of it, that does not mean that we are going to lose. It means it's going to be a close race, which brings me to the second point, and that is to, again, not look at the polls, do not doom scroll, do not despair and waste your energy doing that when we have the opportunity right now to volunteer. There's still more to do. You can go to votesaveamerica.com, find opportunities to volunteer, to donate. You can go to Stand Up America, find opportunities to volunteer and donate. You can go to any campaign page. They're looking for phone bankers, text bankers, canvassers, door knockers. There is still something left to do. You can donate if you have the opportunity to do so. So there is still something to do. I promise you, if you use this time more productively, then you'll look back and feel a lot better as the result of it. And finally, my last piece of advice is to find 1 or 2 or 3 people in your circle and make that person your responsibility. We all have people in our families, in our neighborhoods, at work, who aren't interested in politics, who don't vote. Maybe they just aged into the process, 18, 19, 20 years old. Make those people your responsibility. It doesn't have to be everybody, but and this is a story that I tell quite often, but in 2020, the difference between a Biden win and a Trump win in Wisconsin, the tipping point state, was 2 votes per precinct. That's all it takes to flip a precinct, which can flip a state, which can flip an election. So don't think that just because it might have a small impact of just flipping 1 or 2 people, that it's not going to have an overall large impact, especially when combined with the effort of everybody else. So again, there's a lot for everybody to be doing. Something that we've found in within the last few weeks and months here is that we're not going to be saved by the media. We just got note that the Washington Post wasn't going to endorse, that USA Today wasn't going to endorse, that the LA Times wasn't going to endorse. The media is not swooping in to save us. In large part, we have judges in the courts who are not swooping in to save us. The Supreme Court is a testament to that. We have prosecutors. I mean, God knows I wish Merrick Garland would be more aggressive, but he's not. And so we have prosecutors who are not swooping in to save us. That tells us pretty clearly that it's going to be on us, which is frankly fine, because we have a lot more power than the courts and the prosecutors and newspapers and mailers and commercials do anyway. And so our ability to communicate with people on a one-on-one basis, to find people who trust us on an individual basis in our household a hell of a lot more than they trust newscasters or influencers or whatever mail they get, cannot be overstated. So that's a lot of power, and I think we have the opportunity right now to use it. Don't look back 2 weeks from today and wish that when you had the opportunity to do something that you could have done more. We have a really rare moment in history right now where we can change the course of history for this country, for our democracy, for our planet. And so let's come together and use that opportunity right now to the best of our ability.
Incredibly powerful and wise words from a very incredibly wise and great person. I was going to say powerful, but if I say you're powerful, then you'll go to your head.
Yeah. Can't have
but thank you to Congressman Raskin who had to run, and thank you to my friend Brian Tyler Cohen for doing this. The entire Democracy Docket team has been looking forward. They are your groupies and big fans. The entire audience has been waiting for you to do this, and I cannot tell you how thankful I am on behalf of everyone that you have joined us today.
Well, thank you. Thank you to people who are tuning in right now. You guys are the engine that powers these campaigns. You are the people that are paying attention, that are taking an active engaged approach in all of this. So thank you to everybody watching. I know that I can speak for everybody in the audience, Mark, in saying that having you in the courts, having someone like Congressman Raskin in the House, that we are beyond grateful to have fighters advocating for us. Congressman Raskin often likes to quote Thomas Paine. So I'll quote Thomas Paine here and say that the times have found us, and these times are difficult, and they're contentious, and they're dangerous, and they are filled with anxiety. But one small consolation for us on the outside is that, we have people like you, people like Congressman Raskin in positions of power where you guys can make a difference. And take it from somebody whose diet these days consists primarily of Xanax, that really does count for something. It is at least a small weight lifted off our shoulders. So on behalf of everybody watching this, and on behalf of the millions of Americans who aren't watching this and who don't know you, but will benefit from your relentless defense of democracy, thank you for carrying that burden for us, and for the work that you do and the work that the congressman does as well. So, and I think we can leave it there.
Yep. I just want to give one final shout out. As I mentioned, this is the last of the 5th of these we will do in the pre-election. Stay tuned. We may do some in the post-election if things get interesting, but I want to take this opportunity to thank the 16-person Democracy Docket team, which has made all of these possible, including Alexa Rothenberg and Talia Marcus, who have been the brainchild behind them. And I want to say a special shout out to them. And also to remind you once again that if you are not already a member of Democracy Docket, for this week only, you can save $20 on an annual premium membership. And the link is in the chat. So with that, thank you to Brian Tyler Cohen. Thank you to Congressman Raskin, and thank you to all of us for joining us. Good night.
Thanks, everybody.